It sounds like you're disappointed in President Biden.
A year ago, exit polls showed Biden's approval rating among black voters at 87%. Now, it's 63%. But ahead of the midterms, Biden and Democrats will need to convince voters like Farouk al-Sahid to turn out. Al-Sahid voted for the first time in 2020.
Democrats haven't done anything to improve my black quality of life in the States. We might just have to sit this one out.
Jasiri X helped turn out the vote for President Biden in 2020. But now,
you have a lot of black people that feel like we sacrificed a lot to make sure this administration came in, and we haven't collectively reaped the benefits.
It is no secret many black Americans are disgruntled with the Democratic Party. They feel like they're taken for granted, and time again, voting as the most united bloc African Americans are. But at the end, the demands of black people remain unfulfilled by the Democratic leadership. In a recent Newsweek opinion article, contributor Pamela Denise Long declares it is time for black America to break up with the Democratic Party. She goes on to say, if they want our votes, let them earn them.
Stephen A. said that every black person in America should vote Republican for at least one election. Stephen A. Smith is joining me now. Stephen, who are you trying to send a message to? Republicans, Democrats, African Americans, all of the above?
I'd go with all of the above. That sounds about right, but specifically the Democratic Party from the standpoint that I definitely believe that the black vote has been taken for granted.
Joe Biden walking back controversial comments he made about undecided African-American voters. It came during an interview with Breakfast Club radio host Charlemagne the God. The former vice president was touting his record and support for the black community when he said this.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see.
Take a look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years.
He was out there with James O. Eastland, John B. Stennis. Faubus came in from Arkansas. That's the fool who said they'd never integrate the Little Rock High School. They had Wallace there, who was wheeled in, and they had Byrd, former Grand Dragon of the Klan, and they were talking about this young man who had a stupid-looking ducktail like he was back in the 1950s, was the last true yellow dog Dixiecrat. And they were talking about Joe Biden, who got up there, and when the speech he gave, I mean, I was really offended.
Then Senator Hubert Humphrey from Minnesota gets up and says it's time for us to walk out of the shadow of states' rights into the bright sunshine of civil rights. At the same time, the Republican Party is struggling with its history of emancipation and civil rights. You get someone like Dwight Eisenhower who says that integration, desegregation should go slow. That sort of personifies some of this movement of the Republican Party away from its traditional belief in civil rights and extending rights to African Americans, especially by the mid-1960s. You get Lyndon Johnson, who's going to take the lead on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and by that point, the shit is cooked, right? The Republican Party opposes it. Its standard bearer, Barry Goldwater, opposes it in 1964. He calls it a piece of communistic legislation. At that point, I think the door closes, right? At that point, African Americans who are politically active are Democrats.
For Parkland, for Orlando, for every community affected by gun violence, ending gun violence.
Climate change and the lack of economic mobility Bernie talks about.
Family Bill of Rights that includes a national paid leave plan, universal pre-K, affordable daycare, and making sure that women and families can thrive in the workplace no matter who they are. Passing a middle class and working families tax cut, DACA, guns.
I'm giving you credit for the first thing you said, the tax cut. I got it. Senator saying that there's only one or two issues out there. This country faces enormous crises. We need a political revolution. People are going to stand up and take on the special interest. We can transform this country.
I think you're so underestimating what Barack Obama did. He's the first man to bring together the entire world, 196 nations, to commit to deal with climate change immediately. So I don't buy that. But the first thing I would do is make sure that we defeat Donald Trump.
We've got to fix our democracy before it's too late. Get that right. Climate, immigration, taxes, and every other issue gets done. I would pass a $1,000 freedom dividend for every American adult starting at age 18, which would speed us up on climate change, because if you get the boot off of people's throats, they'll focus on climate change much more clearly.
I would do a collaborative approach to climate change, and I would pronounce it well before the election to make sure we don't re-elect the worst president in American history.
Call is to Prime Minister of New Zealand, who said that her goal is to make New Zealand the place where it's the best place in the world for a child to grow up. And I would tell her, girlfriend, you were so wrong, because the United States of America is going to be the best place in the world for a child to grow up.
Whether it's a residential street in the Bronx or a subway station in Midtown Manhattan, New Yorkers feel more vulnerable tonight than they have in years.
It's just a very sad situation, what's going on in New York City. I hope New York City gets better.
Violent crime has been rising over the past 2 years, with crazed, unstable people in the subways and fearless teenagers with guns. Shootings that once took place in back alleys now happen on crowded streets in the middle of the afternoon. Gang members blasting at one another, with bystanders caught in the crossfire. Among the latest victims, an infant struck in the face with a stray bullet. Police officers are being shot, and unsuspecting subway riders are being attacked at random. Others are being robbed. In the past 2 months, it's become an onslaught.
Joining us now, one of the voting rights advocates who will not be attending President Biden's speech today, the co-founder of Black Voters Matter, Cliff Albright. Cliff, why aren't you going?
Because at this point, what we're saying is we don't need another speech from the president. He gave a very passionate speech, not only the one that he gave for the commemoration last week of January 6th, but remember, he gave a very passionate speech back in Philadelphia, back in July. But then literally for 7 months, we heard nothing else about voting rights from him. And so now is not the time for another speech.
What more could he do?
We're not asking him to do things not just that other presidents have done. We're asking him to do the things, actions that he's even done on other things like infrastructure. There's no sense in having 40 years of Senate experience only to tell us that you can't whip 2 votes.
It sounds like you're disappointed in President Biden.
The Pittsburgh activist says Biden has failed to deliver on his promises.
There's been a direct attack on our voting rights. That hasn't been addressed, right? We did all of this organizing around police reform, but like the opposite has happened. It's almost like we're last on the agenda.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on with us. So, Sharice, tell us why are you conservative?
Well, first of all, I would say that I was raised in a Christian home. My grandparents are pastors, and they raised my mother to be Christian and conservative, which in turn had her raise me to be Christian and conservative.
How about you, Felicia?
My father raised me to be conservative. This is just all I know. Big shout out to Dad right now who's watching. And this is pretty much the experience for a lot of Black Americans. We are conservative in our values.
So when we look at capitalism as something that has oppressed minorities or is oppressing minorities, we remove from ourselves the capacity to use capitalism in order to build our communities, in order to move forward for ourselves. Because I came out as a Black gay conservative about 6 months ago. I have been treated horribly by other gay people. The only friends that have dumped me, or quote unquote friends that have dumped me for being conservative Republican, have been the gay ones. The people who give me the most grief on social media have been the gay ones. The people that call me the nastiest, all kinds of like, oh, house nigga, Uncle Tom, like all this stuff. Like these have been gay people, or the people from the quote unquote tolerant and inclusive LGBTQ community.
I've been called a bed wench. I've been called, and I mean, I'm talking about from my Black brothers who on they page be talking about Black queens and all of this stuff like that. But the moment I don't agree with nothing they talking about, now I'm a bed wench. Now you know what I'm saying? I'm all this other stuff.